Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Lausan. We're a decolonial left collective of activists and organizers, artists and scholars and writers who do Hong Kong solidarity work. Today we'll have a panel that has been some time coming. It's medical workers, unions, and movement building from Hong Kong to the US. My name is Gaston. I'm a member of the Lausan Collective, as well as a frontline medical worker and organizer in the Bay Area, California on Ohlone land. I have the honor of moderating today's panel. I'm gonna just do some housekeeping items, and then I'd like to give some context for tonight's forum and then introduce the speakers. Firstly, we do have live interpretation available. If you need English to Cantonese interpretation, you'll want to click on the icon that looks like a globe and select the language that you want. And because of that, we're gonna ask speakers to just speak a little more slowly than usual and build in breaks where possible. And just one quick note about security, we should really treat Zoom as a public venue, and we are recording this, so please take the necessary steps to protect yourself. If you have doubts about bringing up some potentially sensitive information, it's probably best just to table the discussion and have it in another medium. That said, Lausan Collective strives to be a safe space for collaboration, learning, and critique. We are built upon an ethic of care, solidarity, and of course, good faith. Lausan firmly rejects, as a result, all ideologies of dehumanization, including but not limited to sexism, racism, classism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, and ageism. We just ask that we all collectively respect each other and see if we can build a space of collaboration together. And so onwards to tonight, this is webinar number 4 so far this month about different folks on various front lines. We've had panels featuring an activist exchange from Black Lives Matter to Hong Kong, and recently a panel on sex workers beyond borders. And they've always been on the front lines against abolition and racism. If you missed those, the recordings are available on our website. Definitely go check this out. And in the past month here in the US, we've seen new front lines emerge here as well as around the world, as cities everywhere have held some of the largest and most militant protests in decades for Black liberation, for justice for Black lives. And this has really converged with an ongoing pandemic as the US has hit record daily highs for new COVID cases on back-to-back days just earlier this week. We're absolutely still in this. Tonight, we'll be in conversation with some frontline medical workers who have taken the lead in their workplaces to organize for better conditions. In Hong Kong, we've witnessed an incredible bottom-up response to COVID-19, and because of that, to this day, there have only been 7 deaths. That is no coincidence, because Hong Kong has undergone a mass unionization wave earlier this year and has even hosted some strikes, which we'll hear about tonight. And we as Lausan, we get questions all the time about how people can support the struggles in Hong Kong. And so whenever possible, we want to uplift the struggles of normal everyday workers just like us. And this offers a concrete example of how we can build international solidarity with each other that's rooted in the workplace. And this is just one concrete alternative that people abroad can keep developing. And so the panel of speakers tonight, I'll just quickly introduce each one of you. Winnie Yu is the current chair of Hong Kong's Hospital Authority Employees Alliance, the HAEA. Ivan Law is the vice chair of Hospital Authority Employees Alliance. Dennis Kosuth is a nurse in 2 unions, the Chicago Teachers Union and National Nurses United. Jennifer Esteen is a nurse in Service Employees International Union, SEIU, local 10-1 in the Bay Area. And so speakers will go for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards. So I'll go ahead and kick it to Winnie. Winnie is one of the founders and the current chairperson of the Hospital Authority Employees Alliance. She is currently a health informatics analyst at Hong Kong's Hospital Authority and was previously a medicine unit and ICU nurse for 7 years. So without further ado, Winnie, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your invitation and thanks for your introduction, Gaston. So I would like to give you all of you about the background information of our union and the strike plan of a union organized in February in 2020 this year. So first of all, I'll give you the programming information of our union first. Our union, the Hospital Authority Employees Alliance, was established in just last year, in early December last year. Because of the anti-extradition bill movement, we have to stand out and stand against the suppression from the Hong Kong government and the police brutality in Hong Kong. So there was a new wave of setting up a newly formed trade union in Hong Kong since last year. We want to diversify the protest tactics and organized a general strike as a new tool for civil disobedience. And our union was officially established in December 2019. Our members are the employees under the Hospital Authority in Hong Kong. And the Hospital Authority, the HA, manages the public health services in Hong Kong, which serving about more than 90% of medical services in Hong Kong. Currently, the HA has about 80,000 employees, which is the second largest employer in Hong Kong, following the civil servants. And our latest numbers of members were about 20,000, which comprised of about 1/4 of the HA workforce. As a newly formed union, we have never thought that we have to organize a strike in such an early timeline, but we have to act so fast and respond so fast because we knew that the outbreak of novel virus in China since late December last year. And most of the Hong Kong people were so afraid that Hong Kong would be in danger of becoming another hotspots and other infection hotspots because the geographical location of Hong Kong and China was so close, and there was so many close transport ties with Wuhan. For example, the direct high-speed rail. And Hong Kong was a densely populated city, so which makes that the infection to be spread out in a very quick way. And the pro-Beijing government was so reluctant to cut all the ties with China to protect Hong Kong citizens from the coronavirus. And one of the major reasons why the Hong Kong people was so proactively react to the outbreak news because we got a disastrous history of SARS in 2003, and we lost about 300 lives, including 8 medical staff at that epidemic. So, and some of you may think that it would not be possible for medical staff to go on strike, but many studies and journals stating that under certain circumstances, medical strike would not only permissible, but morally necessary. And our standpoint from HADA was if the government was not pressurized seriously to take any actions towards the coronavirus, the public healthcare system in Hong Kong and Hong Kong citizens would definitely suffer. And we don't want the history of SARS to happen again in Hong Kong. So we have to organize a strike and industrial action to fight against the coronavirus outbreak in Hong Kong. And there were 5 demands from our union for the strike. I could show you the 5 demands for all of you. Okay, and here are the 5 demands from us. The first 2 is we urge our employer to issue a public statement to put pressure on the government to forbid all travelers from entering Hong Kong via China, no matter which countries they're from, and to implement constructive measures to ensure sufficient supply of surgical masks in Hong Kong, And the following three demands we urge to HA to ensure a safe working environment for our staff. The first one is to ensure sufficient isolation areas and to cut all non-emergency services so as to deploy sufficient staff to the hot zone and to fight against the virus. Secondly, to provide enough equipment for our staff, including the personal protective equipment. The last one is to commit not taking any disciplinary actions in retaliation for the staff who have participated in the strike. And our strike was a 5-day strike plan. It includes 2 tiers. And the first tier, only the first day of our strike is the first tier. And only the members who provide non-emergency services will join the first tier. On that day, about 3,000 members joined the first day of the strike. And a negotiation meeting with the HA was held in the evening. But unfortunately, the meeting was so inconclusive. So we have to escalate it to the second tier of our strike plan. And our strike plan second tier started from the day 2 to day 5 of our plan. And all members who have signed the pledge to strike, including those providing the emergency services, who took part in the second tier. And the government announced the mandatory quarantine from all travelers from China, but not closing all the borders on the day 3 of our strike plan. Another negotiation meeting with the HA was held again on day 4 night, but it was not a productive one. So we went to the headquarters on day 5 to protest again. And on day 5, we organized in a democratic way to decide whether to extend our strike or not. We held an online voting, and more than 7,000 of our members voted for the online voting, and about 57% of members vote against to extend the strike. So according to the result, we withhold the strike according to the result. And here shows you some statistics from our strike. And about 8,500 members participated in our strike. And over 66% were nurses and over 15% were allied health. And it's comprised of about 20% of the total workforce of nurses and 50% of total workforce of allied health in the HA. And generally speaking, over 10% of the HA workforce participated in our strike. We could not say that the strike was very successful, but what we achieved that is we aroused the awareness of Hong Kong citizens about the impending outbreak of Wuhan pneumonia in Hong Kong. And what we achieved during the strike is the government introduced measures to reduce travelers from China, closing most of the borders between Hong Kong and China. And the number of travelers from China was greatly reduced at that time. Secondly, the government imposed a 14-day mandatory quarantine on all the people entering Hong Kong from China, and to suspend immigration services at various terminals. And the government set up a relevant fund of over 10 billion to offer assistance to enterprises and members of the public. So that's the result of our strike. And I think that the strike was not totally successful, but partially successful to our union and to Hong Kong citizens. So it's all about formal sharing. So I would pass the time to Gaston to hold the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Winnie. Like some of the demands that just really stood out to me are just really basic, just asking for sufficient masks and sufficient isolation wards. These are just basic things that medical workers need in order to make it through just any outbreak, but a pandemic especially. Thank you for that. Next, we'll have Ivan Law. Ivan Law is a public hospital nurse for 4 years now. Ivan is HAEA's vice chair. The Alliance organized a historic medical worker strike that we just heard about in early February 2020, demanding the border closure and PPE for medical personnel in order to prevent a COVID outbreak in Hong Kong. Ivan, take it away. Ivan, I think you're muted.
Hello. Okay. I'm Ivan. I will talk about the government pandemic response and the politics behind the response. And I will first talk about the first wave of the pandemic in Hong Kong. It's around the Chinese New Year time. Is about the time that our strike happens. And mainly the cases are made at that time are imported from the mainland China, and the government have very late response after even some experts expressed their opinions on both wearing masks and also closing up the borders, and they also deframed demand, saying that closing out the border against China is kind of racism, or kind of trying to focus on the mainland Chinese, whatever. And the politics behind those are not just about poor governance, but also closing out the borders against mainland China. They think because they think they need to have consent with the Chinese government and do not want any signs of moves that oppose the Chinese Communist Party's will. So the government have very late response on closing out the borders. So this is also why we have to organize industrial actions on that. And any signs or moves that oppose the Chinese Communist Party is very politically sensitive to the Hong Kong government, as the context is that at that time the anti-extradition bill protest has already happened around half a year at that time. So the government was reluctant to do any actions before they get some consent from the Chinese government. So that's why they're acting very slow, even slower than Taiwan and Macau at that time. And for information, Macau is kind of like the government, or the people is like more like post-CCP, and the national security law has already enacted in Macau already, but not in Hong Kong. And I will also like to talk about why the government do not want to although they have some measures, for example, the mandatory 14 days quarantine after you entered Hong Kong, but they will not claim that they are responding to the medical strike at that time, because they do not want to back down or show any signs of compromise with any parties that oppose to the government, and even all the extension parts of the government. I will consider HA is the hospital authority is one of the extension part of the government, and they do not want any those kind of authorities or parts that from all the extensions of the government to show any signs of backing down, because this is kind of like CCP style and presidency style over the past few years in mainland China. They do not want to show any signs of backing down. So it's also very coherent to the response on the anti-extradition bills protest. They do not want to correct the actions of the police, and also do not want to establish any investigations body against the police. This is also very consistent. And then I would like to move on to the second wave in Hong Kong. Is around late April and early May. Mainly, they are the cases are from the mainland, from the overseas students that who are originally Hong Kong residents coming back to Hong Kong from different countries like UK or US. They were currently studying in the university there, so they come back to Hong Kong at that time. Then there's a pandemic. There's a wave around late April. Yep, and the government has also have very late response on that. They are setting up the screening near the airport very late, and I think this is kind of like not so political at that kind of action. This is mainly because of the poor governance of the Hong Kong government. So yeah, at that time, and also there is a prohibition of group gatherings starting from the second wave at that time. And until now, they have also extended the prohibition of group gatherings to around 50 people outdoor, but they do not prohibit any group gatherings which is ridiculous, because they're currently using some public reasons for banning any public assemblies in order to prohibit any demonstration against the government. Because recently Hong Kong are facing about the national security law issue, and some of the people are trying to organize some public assemblies against the national security law that will be enacted. Enacted in Hong Kong. However, the government is using some public health reasons to ban these kind of things, and yeah. So this is like government response on the pandemic and the politics behind. That's all for my sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Ivan, for fleshing out the details about the response. Next, we'll have Dennis Kosu. Dennis is a longtime socialist and a nurse for 13 years, working in emergency rooms and schools. He's an active member of two unions, the mighty Chicago Teachers Union and National Nurses United. Go for it, Dennis.
Yeah, those unions are definitely strong, and I can take zero credit for that, but I definitely am happy to be members of those organizations. So I think people probably already know this, but the United States is a deeply racist country. It was founded on land that was stolen through genocide, and the wealth that this country was founded upon was created using labor that was stolen from enslaved people brought to this continent in chains. This country has always been racist, and it's no surprise that racism infects every aspect of this society. When it comes to coronavirus, to COVID-19, racism is deeply ingrained in that equation. I think, first of all, it's in how this government handled it when it first arrived. Their solution was, we're going to ban travel from China. Let's just shut the borders. That was their first solution. And clearly that had nothing to do with the solution. When coronavirus did come in, it came in through Europe and not coming through China, and when it came into New York at least. But that's not even the main thing. Trump, when he would talk about coronavirus, he would call it the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, Kung flu. And these are just so stupid. Obviously coronavirus, COVID-19 has nothing to do with any ethnicity or culture. It's a virus. It doesn't care about where it comes from or who it infects. But his words matter. They're actually serious, because there has been a spike in attacks on anybody who appears to be Chinese or of Asian heritage in this country. When they did an article at the end of March, and I think there's organizations who are tracking attacks at the end of March, they already logged in over 1,000 incidents of people being harassed for being just looking Chinese because of the way that it's being talked about. One of the worst examples people may have heard of, in mid-March, there was a Chinese family. I think they were at a Sam's Club or one of those, some store, and they were attacked by somebody in Texas. This person with a knife basically went after a family. There's pictures that are horrible to watch. A 2-year-old and a 6-year-old with cuts, onto their faces from this knife attack. And these words matter. The racism is certainly strong in how coronavirus is being talked about. I mean, furthermore, there was just no collaboration between the governments to try and talk about what it would take to fight coronavirus. I mean, if in a sane world where people were actually interested, where governments were interested in helping people and minimizing the impact of any kind of pandemic, they would have had collaboration. You would have had scientists, epidemiologists, infectious disease doctors, frontline healthcare workers talking to each other, talking about what worked, what didn't work, try this, don't try this, and then to minimize the impact of viruses as they spread around the globe. But of course, because the Trump administration and the US government in general sees themselves in competition with China, sees China as someone they want to fight and defeat or whatever, there was very little collaboration between those governments, which is a shame, because now we can see the impact of that. I mean, the number of cases in this country are already through the roof. They're totally unmanageable. It's not being managed well. And there's a second wave, as people know, particularly in states that had very lax methods to try and deal with it. So anyway, that's the one end of the racist equation, is how they characterize the virus and how they failed to collaborate with the Chinese government. The other end of the racism is in how they once it arrived here. And when it comes to Chicago, for example, the African Americans make up about 30% of the population. Chicago is the third largest city in the United States. It's about just about 3 million people. So African Americans make up 30%, but made up over 70% of the deaths from coronavirus, and that is just totally outrageous. And it's due to a chronic racist health inequities that have existed in this country for decades, if not centuries. And there's nothing to do with African Americans being more susceptible to coronavirus, but it has to do with how pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure, asthma, diabetes push you at higher risk to have worse outcomes if you do catch it. And African Americans have higher incidences of the diseases, not because there's some melanin-linked gene where because of the color of your skin, you are more likely to have those diseases. It has to do with how people live in neighborhoods that don't have access to healthy foods. They don't have access to clean air. They live in substandard housing. They don't have access to medical care. And those are the issues that cause those diseases to exist higher amongst that population, and therefore they've been more heavily impacted. Furthermore, who are these essential workers that exist in cities like Chicago? Who works in warehouses, who works in grocery stores, who works as delivery drivers, who works as postal workers, delivering mail. Those are disproportionately African-American and brown people in cities like Chicago. So of course, they're gonna have a higher risk to catch coronavirus. In the ER that I work at, I've treated lots of people who are bus drivers, and it's an ER in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. Bus drivers, nursing home workers who would catch coronavirus from just having worked in places that they didn't have enough PPE, they didn't have the safe equipment, they didn't have access to the kind of things to keep themselves safe. The ER I worked at, in fact, was actually shut down for 2 weeks during the coronavirus. The same weekend when the news announced that African Americans were disproportionately dying from coronavirus, they decided to close the emergency room. And this because the reason they did that is because this ER is in a neighborhood that is lower income. There's a lot of poverty there, and it's vast majority African American. There's no way that they would have closed an ER in a wealthy white neighborhood. And we protested that, and we fought and forced them, really embarrassed them into reopening an ER, because you just couldn't imagine the stress that people were feeling. It's like the same weekend they're announcing, oh, by the way, Black people are 70% of deaths, and we're also going to close down the access you have to healthcare in that community. It was just mind blowing that they did that. But we did organize, and we forced them to reopen. They said they would be closed a month, and because of our pressure, I believe we reduced that to 2 weeks. But these chronic racist health inequities need to be fought. They need to be struggled against. They existed long before coronavirus. Even in the neighborhood the hospital I work at in Washington Park, if you cross one street between Washington Park and the neighboring Hyde Park, which is the other neighborhood, you will lose on average 14 years from your life expectancy. How is it that if you're something you have no choice over which side of the street you're born on, because Hyde Park has a very prestigious university that has an $8 billion endowment. The University of Chicago is in Hyde Park. So people there tend to be more wealthy. They have more access to the things that extend life. And the people in Washington Park, literally across the street from Cottage Grove, don't have access to the same things. So they on average live 14 years less. It is totally criminal that happens. Chicago actually has one of the largest what we call death gaps in this country. Streeterville, which is just north of the downtown business district for Chicago, very wealthy, very much a white area, has the average life expectancy of 90. So people on average live 90 years old there. In Englewood, which is about 8 miles from Streeterville, you could literally ride your bike between those two places. The average life expectancy is only 60. So how can you have, again, in the same city, in the richest country that has ever existed in the history of people, a 30-year gap in life expectancy? That is just a disgusting fact. And this existed before coronavirus. So I'm sure these numbers are going to get even worse. So I'll wrap up by saying, despite all this disgusting numbers about how disproportionate the damage has been because of coronavirus, and a lot of it is because of racism, there is still hope. There's people struggling. Just this morning, we had an event here in Chicago. We had unions, my union, as well as other unions that represent healthcare workers. We joined together with abolitionist organizations. These are radical Black organizations who are coming together to fight against the racism that exists in this country. They've been fighting in this city for a long time, but as people have seen on the news, the murder of George Floyd really put things over the edge for a lot of people and saying, we can't take this anymore. And so cities have been rising up. And so we brought together a coalition of those organizations, these Black-led abolitionist organizations, as well as healthcare justice organizations, groups who are fighting for a different kind of healthcare system, what's not based on making money, but based on actually providing the care that people need. We also brought together the Democratic Socialists of America. It's a socialist organization that people may have heard of. And so these groups came together and called this protest. And the basic message of our protest is we need to defund the police. We need to get rid of institutions that hurt and damage and murder people. And we need to fund or invest in community organizations and institutions that actually help people. like more clinics, more mental health clinics, more hospitals, more COVID testing sites. So that was the rally's basic demand. It was just an important thing that these groups came together. I mean, the fact is that Chicago budget for policing is $1.8 billion a year. That I'm just curious how much that is in Hong Kong dollars. That's 14 billion Hong Kong dollars is spent just on policing in this city. 40% of the budget, to my understanding, goes towards policing. It's an amazing amount of money. And you think about how can 40% of your problems be solved with someone with a gun and handcuffs? It's just, it makes no sense. But that's how the priorities in this city are being held, and we're trying to change that through our action. Thank you for your time.
Dennis, thank you for your inspiring work. That's definitely the lens that we have to take against racism, defunding the police so that we can fund services that actually help people. There's no reason to be closing out schools in this time. There's no reason that we have a shortage of ICU beds and PPE while the police are in fact overly funded. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer Esteen. Jennifer is a dedicated public servant, social justice advocate, and psychiatric registered nurse working for the San Francisco Department of Public Health for the last 10 years. In her role as a nurse, Jennifer has served the most vulnerable adults in San Francisco who have been directly affected by the impact of poverty, marginalization, and oppression. Jennifer is also serving as a member of the Housing Conservatorship Working Group in San Francisco, is a board member of the Jewish Youth for Community Action, and is also working as the vice president of organizing for SEIU Local 10-1. Jennifer, take it away.
Thanks for that great introduction, Gaston. And it's hard to follow Dennis, man. You laid it out with the racist impacts that happen on our communities. And what's happening in Chicago is similar to what's happening in a lot of urban areas all over the country. Winnie, I'm super inspired by the work you and Ivan have been doing in Hong Kong in establishing a union and in fighting, because what you guys did in your strike is pretty amazing. And it's similar to the work that we've been doing here in the Bay Area. We've been trying to fight to make sure that everybody has adequate PPE. And the governor announced that he was going to invest $2 billion in PPE this year and have millions of masks, hundreds of millions of masks coming in, so that we, all Bay Area healthcare workers, all frontline workers would have enough PPE. And that was our first major win. But the fight continues, because now we're talking about reopening and people are getting sick all over again. So in Texas, we just had such a large outbreak that they are sending people from their overwhelmed ICU beds to different states. And different parts of the country, it is really, really sad because the for-profit healthcare system, the just-in-time healthcare system that we are living within, means that we don't have adequate amounts of ICU beds and ER space. To hear that they closed the emergency room, Dennis, in your neighborhood is reprehensible. Like, how could you close an emergency room at all? But you know, we have hospitals closing all the time. One of the first orders that our governor announced was that he was going to invest like $30 million in reopening a hospital that had just closed. So because everything is for profit, having lots of empty beds doesn't make money. So instead of being prepared for the emergency that might come, being prepared for the forest fire that we know is coming, and being prepared for the pandemic that we actually can't predict, we are unprepared and we are understaffed. So in San Francisco, we've been running a 20% vacancy for the last 10 years. And it's really sad. You know, people have celebrated the decisions that have been made in the Bay Area because similar to Hong Kong, we have a very low death rate. We still have had under 50 deaths in San Francisco. In other parts of the Bay Area, there's a few more deaths. In the poorest parts of Alameda County, like where I live, there's many more infections because I live in an area where there's more people of color, where there's impoverished people. I live in an unincorporated area, which means we don't have like a mayor and a city hall. We're covered by the county government, and our lack of representation means that we also have a lack of services. And this is because we are, you know, brown people, people who are immigrants, people who don't speak English as their first language. And all of the folks who live in these types of neighborhoods, even in rich San Francisco, which is like the 5th largest economy in the world, in a small 7-by-7 square mile city, we see disproportionate impacts amongst our communities where white people may live but don't get sick. It's always the brown people. It's always the Black people. It's always the people who can't shelter in place. San Francisco is also home to sometimes people count it as high as 18,000 homeless people and 75 billionaires living in the same exact town. That kind of disproportion, you know, Dennis, as you talk about the disproportion in people's lifespan, the disproportion in people's access to preventative health care leads to gross changes and outcomes. So what we're experiencing in the Bay Area is a low death rate because our policymakers know that our healthcare system will be easily overwhelmed. And so they made a smart decision to encourage us all to shelter in place. And now that the state and every county is trying to reopen, we see huge spikes in cases. Marin County just decided after a week to start closing all over again. They said people can't go to bars and they want people to stay home because unfortunately, that's the only science that we have. We don't have enough hospitals and ERs and ICUs. But even the beds that we do have, in California alone, 66,000 healthcare workers have been infected with COVID. That's unacceptable to have that much impact amongst our healthcare providers. So while we are talking about, you know, who's going to wear a mask and who's going to shelter in place and whether or not they can, the impact on healthcare workers is still really, really high. You know, frontline workers, like Dennis said, it's brown people who are working in grocery stores, who are 80% of Uber and Lyft drivers in America are people of color. And the majority of those folks don't speak English as a first language. So we're talking about immigrant populations and people of color that are driving cars, doing delivery work, bringing goods and services to folks who are sheltering in place and getting sick themselves. And Uber and Lyft are refusing to recognize these people even as employees. The taxpayers of America have to cover the cost of unemployment insurance for the drivers who can't even work. And the drivers who still work have to continue covering the cost of their own cleaning supplies, their own protective equipment, and all their regular costs on top of that. So it's really, really sad that we have to live within this capitalist structure that's based on racist colonialism and that continues to take advantage of brown people's labor and Black people's labor and continues to profit on our backs, but offers nothing to us in return, except continue to take it, guys, and make us money. It's really sick. You know, we have Tesla Motors is right here in Alameda County, again, where I live. And the CEO of that company, Elon Musk, said he didn't care that the law told him not to open his factory. He needed to make more Teslas. He needed to sell more $90,000 cars. And he opened the factory and told his workers if they didn't come in, that was okay, they would have no job. So his workers had to come in. They didn't even have safe social distance procedures. They didn't even have safe workspaces and proper PPE. This guy's a billionaire. You know, the thing that really outrages me that COVID has exposed is that all these companies, and in addition to that, the Black Lives Matter protests, all these companies that are like, we stand with you, we believe in you, you know, we understand that racism is bad. They say those things, they make tiny little donations, but they continue to exploit the working class people that make their billions. And that is the problem, that is why we have to continue to mobilize, to activate, and to organize. Because when we stand together, those billionaires have nothing. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm going to give it back to you, Gaston.
Jennifer, I'm getting chills. That was so good. We got to mobilize, activate, and organize. That's absolutely true. We have about 40 minutes or so to do some Q&A. If people don't mind just typing it out in the chat, that would be great. And we can have questions directed at specific speakers or at just the panel in general. I want to open up with one of my own, and it's about just the particular challenges and the particular lessons of workplace organizing. What kind of lessons from specifically labor organizing can all of you share with us as we engage with broader social movements, right? As we get more into these uprisings for Black lives, as Hong Kong is still undergoing protests. So yeah, what kind of lessons from labor can you share with us for the social justice movements? Any of you feel free to just jump right in.
Hi, I'm Winnie. So I would like to point out that the power from the union would be a great power towards any movement. As the united our employees' power, we can go out and stand against our employer, just like we stand against the hospital authority in Hong Kong during our strike. And we can gather the members who oppose the national security law and oppose the government, the rules that the poorly governed Hong Kong, just like the poor government in tackling the coronavirus in this year. So we can organize a medical strike in Hong Kong, and we could gather the power to organize assembly or protest or demonstration in Hong Kong among the trade unions newly formed in Hong Kong. So I'm looking forward to the power that we could gather during the movement. So maybe you guys have any other ideas on the social movement?
Let me talk about it's not much organizing that we are doing during the strike. Actually, it's just like the news that keeps popping out, like the medical staff do not have adequate PPE, and there is a kind of a horror of the SARS is coming again, and which is all the Hong Kong people have and the medical staff also have a bad memories about the SARS, and so that they will react to that, and the unions is like respond to all those people, and before the strike, and they have already some collective actions from the ICU nurse and from the OT nurse, operation theater nurses. They are collectively calling sick before the unions start our actions. So actually, I don't think we are doing a lot of organizing before the strike. but we also know that the people have this kind of passion, or this kind of they want to have an action to tell the government to do their work, so that we can so that the strike can happen in February. So in this kind of contest, and also before our union was formed, the social movement has also given us a lot of energy, so that we can attract our members to join our union. So actually, I don't think we're doing so much of organizing. We just ride the tide of the social movement, so that our union can form and also the strike can happen. So yeah, that's my opinion.
I'll just add a few words. I think it's a very important question. What role can labor play? Because I think at the end of the day, labor has the power to make so many changes. With workers organized together, the possibilities are limitless when you think about it. The Chicago Teachers Union went on strike for 11 days this past October, and one of the things we went on strike over was to put more nurses in schools. So you can see how labor can mobilize your members, get people out, and shut down a city, fighting over political questions like services for our children, health services for children, because there's not enough nurses in the schools. Last year when I worked in the schools, I had 6 schools, and it's just impossible. How can I provide any kind of reasonable amount of services for these kids going between 6 buildings? This last year was a little better. I had 4 schools, but it's still, there's much more to be done than we needed. So that's the power of labor. So to fight for that. Now through our strike, we have an agreement where the schools have to hire 250 nurses by the end of our 5-year contract, which is progress. One of the things we're fighting over right now as well is to get the police out of schools. Right now, the CPS pays the police department $33 million a year to have police in the schools, and the police don't do anything that help. I worked in a school some years ago where a student got into a fight with a classmate, and somebody called the police on them. I don't know why. And this is a 5th grader. This person was about 9 or 10 years old. They got into a fight. Why you called the police, I don't know, but the police officer came in there. The person was trying to talk to the student to calm them down. So I went in there also to try to calm them down, but their partner came in and literally put handcuffs on the student, drugged them out of the school, and put them in a police car. And that wasn't even the worst part about it. Putting a 5th grader in handcuffs wasn't the worst part of it, because I found out the next day from the principal at the school that this student's parent, the person who raised them, was actually killed by the police 3 years beforehand. So you just wonder about the many layers of trauma that this student was already suffering from, why it is that they were getting into fights. It had something to do with the fact they had lost their parent. And the solution is to have them be put in handcuffs by the police. It makes no sense. So this is another thing, again, that the teachers union is fighting over, to get the police out of school, because they don't belong there.
I'm noticing that the chat is lighting up. People are asking about organizing and whether or not labor has enough power. And I think that as we all talk about the outrageous things that happen in our communities, whether it's Hong Kong or America, and I know America, we have a different kind of political system here in America and in California in particular than Chicago or than Hong Kong. You know, we have the freedom of speech where we can say a lot of things. And I think sometimes having rights already, like I walked into a hospital that had a union 10 years ago, and I see a lot of apathy amongst my members. And I think that people don't recognize that in order to keep your rights and to push them forward to get more, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of fighting. It takes a lot of organizing. It takes a lot of unity. It takes a lot of action. And, you know, sometimes people like, let the union fix it, but the union's all of us, right? The union is us. And so in order for us to say, we need more nurses in schools, we have to get in the street and we have to shout for it. We have to gather together. In order for defunding the police, there's thousands of people nationwide protesting. And so even the chat mentioned in LA, it's happening. You know, you got billions of dollars in these budgets for police, billions of dollars in New York, the 6th largest police force, military, whatever, in New York, in a city. In Chicago, 1.6 billion, you said? That's huge. You know, and it like in San Francisco, I think our police have like a $6 billion budget too, but because the nature of our budget or whatever it is, like it's not necessarily the same proportion, or it doesn't come from the general fund. Like there's all these different sources of money. And all that means is they're playing games with us. They're playing games with the money so that they can maintain police power over us. And that's something that we have to push against. The racism in this country is so crazy. Like, you know, the police have all this military might. They have all these weapons and all this like gear that they wear, and hospital nurses are wearing garbage bags, by the way, at the same time. And it's scary. Like literally, it is frightening to imagine standing up. And I admire everyone in Hong Kong for the bravery that they showed for months and months and months before COVID hit, for standing up to the government, for wearing masks, for like leaving work and going right out to the street to protest, because that is hella brave. You know, that is standing up to the mighty state and saying, we won't have it anymore. It has to change. We will continue to face state violence and they will continue to try to silence us. It doesn't mean it's going to work, because we are bigger than them. We are stronger than them, and our might is powerful.
Powerful. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and the rest of the speakers. We do have a great question in the chat that I would like to just read out. So as we fight towards an abolitionist future with, you know, through like defunding the police and then disarming the police, and then the more popular demand of just abolishing the police, how do medical workers, labor movements imagine the possibilities of providing community care free from capitalism, free from nationalism, and other forms of state oppression? I'll give you all a second to kind of digest that. I do just want to lift up, because this is happening, there's some discussion in the chat. I do want to just lift up that I had the opportunity to march alongside Jennifer at the West Coast port shutdown not too long ago on Juneteenth. And it was a coordinated shutdown of 29 ports on the West Coast. And it was for explicitly against systemic racism and police violence, as well as privatization. And so these are the kind of militant actions from labor that we want to see more of.
Right, exactly. That was a beautiful day, Gaston. It was so nice to be out there. I think in America, especially, we have a lot of questions about universal health care. And again, our for-profit capitalist healthcare system doesn't want that at all. We had a presidential candidate in Bernie Sanders who was advocating strongly for universal health care pre-COVID. And we even had some elections for the primaries happening after COVID hit, and people still didn't make the choice for that candidate to bring those rights to all the people, which is super frustrating. But I think that right now, the economic shutdown that COVID has created, again, because of our healthcare systems not being able to tolerate so many sick people, it seems like it's the right time to do away with capitalism. Like, if we didn't have to worry about money, then we could all be sheltering in place. We could all be like safe and just do the work we need to do. How do we get there? I think it takes a lot of work. And I think we have to have more people making policies and making laws. And I think we can do that amongst us.
I would like to respond to that. And you're talking about universal healthcare in the US, because I think it's long history, because all the healthcare system, because I studied public health beforehand, and they have their history on why they are why those systems established like that. And like because in Hong Kong, they're more like the UK, because the systems are from UK. So it's like at that time, and post World War II, and they will have a lot of welfare, and so that welfare state, and also those kind of things. So that in the UK there's NHS, so that's why in Hong Kong there hospital authority established at that in the 1990s. So I think it's a chance, because now the system has been it's like a breakdown, and like you have seen about all the problems in the system, and why privatizing is so bad for the poor people and for the colored people. And in the US, it's like all mixed it up, like the class struggle and the struggle against the racism. But in Hong Kong, it's like a different context. They're all talking about against the tyranny, against Chinese Communist Party. All the movement is like main thing is about that. So it's kind of different, but I think it's a chance, because the system has some we have observed some problem, and also there's not enough ER space and not enough ICU beds. All those kind of things is an opportunity to show the people why privatizing is so bad. So I think it's a good chance for to change. But in Hong Kong, it's like the system is not broken down yet. So the people is do not aware about because actually we're talking about more about primary care, because the primary care in Hong Kong is like behind other countries like 30 years or 20 years something in the development. So and the budget and the development is so bad, and also the physician is dominant in Hong Kong, and also other specialties and other healthcare professionals do not have the power to change the system. So, but all those kind of problems are not widely aware by the people. So I think it's a good chance in the US for now to think about reforming the healthcare system, reforming the financing of the system. Yeah.
I'll just throw out there that it's clear that capitalism has failed on so many levels when it comes to coronavirus. It's failed when it comes to the economic devastation that's occurring in this country right now. The number of people who are unemployed, who have lost health insurance, who can't pay rent, who can't purchase enough food for their families, it has completely failed them on that. And I think racism is put forward and used by capitalism to keep workers divided. It's one of the main tools that they love to use to have us looking at each other sideways rather than looking up at the bosses who are the ones who are exploiting both of us, but they'd rather have us fighting with each other than fighting the bosses. It is the fundamental divide that exists in our society, and we have to overcome, we have to fight against racism, we have to destroy racism if workers are going to come together and fight in a unified way. And these protests have actually given me a lot of hope for that. If you look at pictures of the protests, it's not just African Americans out there, it's all kinds of people that have come out to protest and fight against these racist police and just to fight against racism in general. So I think that that's starting to change. But it's very important, I think, for people outside of the US. They maybe not realize that, especially if a country is much more homogenous ethnically and culturally, to see the impact that racism can have. There's huge gaps, like we were talking before about how healthcare is delivered, and that trickles into every aspect of society. One of the first protests I came to when I moved to Chicago was at a school that was in Chicago. It had 3 levels, but only 1 bathroom that worked in the basement. This school was built in the 1880s or whatever. It was over 100 years ago that the school was built. It was broken down. It didn't have enough facilities. But across the street from that school, they had just finished building a jail for children. It's a juvenile detention center. And it just makes you wonder, like, what kind of message it sends to, and again, this school was majority African-American. What kind of message does it send to these children? This is what we care about. We don't care about the place where you're going to get educated to further your understanding of the world, to be part of building a better life. We care about a jail that we think that you can go live in. And so that's why we have to change with the fight racism. As far as workers getting involved in fighting against capitalism, I think that's a process that's going to take time. The political system is so messed up in this country. We have to fight against that. And unions are complicated that they represent all workers. They don't just represent the radical socialist in the union, they represent everybody in the union. So there has to be debates and discussions within unions and within workplaces about breaking down racist ideas, about how we have to unite and fight against our common enemy.
In response, I'm a bit curious about what will the poor white think in this kind of system, because I think this kind of erases a question, a problem about a mixed up of a lot of problems raised by the racism and also capitalism. There are poor colored people that are being oppressed, but I think in other dimension, the poor whites are also facing some this kind of they do not have universal health coverage because they do not have a good insurance to protect them. So I would like to know in the U.S. How do the poor white think? Are they all Trump supporters or what? But I would like to know more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ivan, for engaging with race politics. I think this is a tricky question because it brings into the intersectional perspective that we all want to use moving forward. I think the spirit of the question is, how do we best build multiracial, right, across just multiracial solidarity with our working class siblings, and that's the question of the era, I think. So if I do want to give an opportunity to Dennis or Jennifer if you want to take up that question, but there are some other great questions in the chat. Maybe I'll just pose the question in the chat and then we can kind of field both. I think it's related actually. The question is, and this has been mentioned before about the US really entering a second wave right now. There's been daily surges in new cases. And so the question is, how do you think non-medical workers, unemployed workers, unemployed people, and non-essential workers can fight against reopening and fight for more PPE when we don't have as much leverage as medical workers? So basically, what can at-risk workers do to organize in these times, and what lessons can you pass on?
I mean, I think the risk is always the same as workers. We always face retaliation, loss of income. Loss of income is really the biggest one, because if you lose your livelihood, it's kind of over. And then if you get retaliated against after that and get blackballed, you might not get another job for a while. right now we're trying to help McDonald's workers. You know, McDonald's is this huge billion-dollar corporation that's worldwide. And we have locally in Oakland and Berkeley, we've got a bunch of workers who have contracted COVID. They've been given no PPE, and they basically stopped going to work. They were like, if you're gonna have these conditions, they were being told that if they didn't come to work, they might be fired. If they wanted to like stay home because they were potentially sick with COVID, that again, they would be reprimanded, possibly fired. So it gets to the point where people start to feel like, well, I've got nothing to lose because you're already telling me I'm not going to get any money from you. So, you know, in some instances, unemployment insurance is really helpful because you can stop working because the employer is doing all these horrible things and you will get some money for a short time period. So right now they have shut down several restaurant locations of McDonald's, and we held a bunch of actions and like blocked their drive-through when nobody could get in and order food. And the corporation is pretty upset, but it's like, we just have to push. You just have to push. And so many people are already out of work. What more can you lose? If you don't fight, you lose it all, right?
Yes, I agree with Jennifer because during our strike, with the support from the citizens is very important. And many Hong Kong citizens showed their support towards our strike. They go on demonstration with us, together with us. So no matter you're employed or already unemployed during the outbreak, during the pandemic condition, you have to show your support towards the medical staff because the coronavirus will not only attack those who work in hospitals, but also in the society. So we have to unite together, stay united and stay strong and fight against the coronavirus together, all together.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a great question was raised about how racism has infected this country. I mean, obviously there's systemic racism that's built into how the United States is run. You look at the prison complex, the prison industrial complex, for example. There are over 2 million people are in jails in the United States. I mean, that is just an outrageous number when you think about it, and disproportionate number of those people in prisons are African Americans, Latinx people, brown people, undocumented people are thrown in jail all the time. It's an industry in this country to put people in jail. There's a systemic racism when it comes to so many levels of things. Obviously, there's also individual racism where white people's some heads get just filled with garbage. This racist garbage, and it's not an excuse, but you turn the television on and you hear Trump words coming out of Trump's mouth. When you see the news, how they portray people of color in this country, it's not surprising that people have these racist ideas. But I think the important point I want to make is those ideas can change. And they change because people start to struggle and see things in a new light. There was a poll that was done in 2016, the same year that Trump was elected, and it asked, are African Americans mistreated at a greater rate by police than white people? And apparently in 2016, only 25% of white people thought that Black people were treated poorly by the police. That's pretty low. I mean, that's kind of embarrassingly low, that level of ignorance about what is a fact that we all know now is a fact. And they did the same poll in the days after George Floyd's murder. And that doubled. That number went over to 50%. So just in a few days, those numbers changed. Now Black Lives Matter is overwhelming. The slogan of Black Lives Matter has overwhelming support amongst people in this country. So it is people fighting and organizing against racism, which in itself changes how people see race and want to learn about it and organize and do something about it. I mean, I also just say, like, are all white, Trump actually didn't get a majority of votes. The way this country talks about China as some horrible, undemocratic place, this country is not democratic. The person who got less votes becomes president. It just makes no sense. So I think that's one thing we should also just remember. Actually, Trump didn't get more votes than Clinton. Not that I like Clinton, but I'm just putting that out there.
Jennifer, I'd just like to give you a chance to jump in as well. If not, we can jump to another question.
Oh, I was just putting stuff in the chat, responding to Annie. She wanted to talk about migrant workers. I think, you know, racism is a hard thing to talk about, and it's a hard thing to experience. And people talk often about homogenous societies where you don't have a whole lot of other people, but I think even that is a myth, because we live in such a global society now where everybody can be connected through the media or on airplanes. You know, you can just get on a flight really quickly. And people migrate to all over the world from lots of places. So I don't know that Hong Kong is as homogenous as people might imagine. Racism is a thing that exists. And because of colonialism, the influence of Western culture and white European culture, to say it really clearly, it's widespread. And white European racist thoughts and beliefs is widespread. You know, sometimes the only access to other portions of the world come through the white racist media. And so even having that as like something you just try to remember as we organize and build our power, that we know ultimately what we have to fight for is the greater good. And the greater good means we cannot necessarily align with things that build more capitalist power. We really have to build power of the working class. And if we build power of the working class, race doesn't matter.
You asked about Hong Kong, right? Before I formed this organizing in the union, actually I've heard about some problems about the domestic workers in Hong Kong, mainly from Philippines, many places like Indonesia, and there are also like racism in Hong Kong that against those domestic workers, and they are poorly treated, and there are also like many Hong Kong people like middle class, or they think that they are more superior than the domestic workers, and also some of them are living in a very poor condition, like living in a shelf in the kitchen, like they sleep in the shelf in the kitchen. So it's a very tiny space to live in, and all those kind of problems has been exposed. But actually the employers, which is also usually the middle class, they are also ignorant about this kind of problems. So yeah, there's also racism in Hong Kong, but this is like not main. Not all the people will care about this kind of problems. I agree that there should be a solidarity, because in the 1st of May, everybody will go on the street, and also the domestic workers, and sometimes I would go to protest with them during the time I was in the student union. So there are some people that care about those kind of problems, but there's not in the mainstream. Yeah.
Awesome. I'd like to just invite people to get in their questions now. We're going to take one last round and then turn it back over to the speakers to wrap up. And we'll just field a couple more questions here. So we got one in the chat. Can speakers go more into strategies for energizing or politicizing coworkers in the workplace, especially from a rank and file centered perspective through unions. Sometimes workplaces have multiple unions as well. And this person would love to hear more about how different unions work differently and provide different challenges and successes for organizing.
I think for the Hospital Authority Employees Alliance, HAEA, we're still facing the challenges from the recognition from our employer, because our employer, the HA, still didn't recognize us as a very strong union because we are uniformed, and they don't want to recognize us because they do not want to put some credit on us, or they have to negotiate directly with us. Is there that I think it's their political issue because our union was a bit anti-government, maybe you may say so, because the government has poorly governed Hong Kong, and since last year, or maybe already years ago, the Hospital Authority, as said by Ivan, is a part of extension of the government, because our funding from the Hospital Authority were almost all the funding are provided by the government. And the budget plan for the Hospital Authority was about 10 billion, if I remember correctly, about 10 billion each year. And the budget to the police force in the coming year would be 3.3 billion in US dollar. I think it is very ridiculous because the funding to the medical services should be in our first priority for major citizens in Hong Kong. But the government would spend the budget to the police force in such a disproportionate way. As a medical union, we have to stand out and voice out that towards the government have to spend more and more on medical service, because the medical service in Hong Kong is currently suffering already. We are so overwhelmed in the public health sectors. In just taking nurses as example in Hong Kong, we have to take care about 12 to 16 patients in each shift at daytime, and more than 20 to 30 patients during nighttime. It's a risk for us and also a risk for the patients in Hong Kong. So we think that the government should put on more budget on the medical service, or even they have to reform the medical service in Hong Kong so that the poor and the rich ones could share the resources in a better way. And for the strategy, we have, and I think we should make use of our power of about 20,000 union members right now we have, and we can go on street and we can demonstrate in the headquarters, and we can issue open letters to the government and collaborate with other medical unions to gather the power and gather more and more power. So we have to work for what we should do and do the right thing we believe in.
I can say something real quick, just in regards to rank and file organizing. I think people make an important point that in some workplaces, you'll have different unions representing different kinds of workers in the same workplace, which is problematic in some ways because, for example, at the county hospital I work at, there's 40 different union contracts between the county government and the people who work in the hospital. And that's just a crazy number of contracts to have to try and follow and understand. And it's a challenge for the workers then to try and have a unified fight against a common employer to get what's best for the patients and what's best for themselves in those contract fights. And so building solidarity between unions is very important and something we have to do. And that's one thing that gave me joy around the protest that we organized this morning, was because we had several unions come together who in the past have tried to fight each other through decertification campaigns and stealing members and all this bullshit, like wasting money, fighting each other rather than fighting the boss. So we need to have a rank and file perspective where we see, as workers, we're united in workplaces fighting a common enemy. And that's why we need democracy in unions, where we elect our officers, we decide what our campaign is going to be, we organize the campaign, we make it happen on ourselves. But that takes a lot of work, because a lot of times in this country in particular, unions are kind of seen like a service, like your car insurance or your cable. If you don't have a problem, you love your cable, you just drive your car, you don't really think about it. And what we need to have is a way of viewing, interacting with unions, that it's an activist thing. It's something you actively participate in, organizing, talking, doing actions at your work with your coworkers to make your working conditions better. That's what unions were founded as, and that's what we need to get back to, that kind of model. And it does require work, it requires effort. And I think when it's particularly will be more likely to happen when there's actual struggle. And I think in the next few months, we're going to see a lot of people, a lot of nurses are being laid off, a lot of benefits are being cut. And as people go back to work in other industries, they're also going to confront unsafe working conditions. They're going to confront issues with their boss. And remember, these are people who have been suffering economically, but also been given hope by a movement that has come from the bottom up to fight against racist police brutality and police murder. And so that, I think, could possibly give people confidence to say, you know what? We didn't put up with this shit when you were killing our brothers and sisters out on the street. We're not going to put up with the same kind of level stuff in our workplaces. We're going to organize. We're going to fight. We're going to shut stuff down if we need to get what's right for us.
I want to let what Dennis said stand, because he's right. It's about organizing every single day. It's about getting engaged, recognizing what the issues are. And sometimes you have an organizing committee that can be small. It can be 5 or 10 people, but you can expand on that and build out from there. And if people are dedicated and they care and they are, respected amongst their colleagues, they can talk to their colleagues. You have one conversation a day with somebody. Every day, have a conversation with someone else, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And not everybody's going to want to buy in at first, but it begins with those organizing conversations. And there's a lot of organizing materials like Jane McAlevey. I can put a link to one of her books in there. There's a lot of different organizing books that you can read that can help. And there's organizing sites like Labor Notes we put in the chat as well. They have great publications. They've been organizing for a long time. They've been studying the labor movement for a long time. It's easy to read. And they even have a whole manual, like one whole pamphlet, kind of like a magazine that came out after the teacher strikes. Because in 2018, the teacher strikes all over America were huge. And they talk about how in LA, they tried to have a strike in 2015, and it didn't work. They couldn't get enough, thank you for that, Rex. They couldn't get enough teachers and support staff and the community to show up. So they did an assessment. They realized that they didn't have enough people. When you go on strike, you really want to get as close to 100% as possible. But they stopped, they organized over the course of 3 years. So it's not something that happens overnight. What we're seeing right now The momentum between Black Lives Matter and this movement is because people are super angry and super agitated, and you have to work with that. You have to then take the energy people have today and build on it. So when you start to organize, it's not something that you can actually expect to just wake up and have a movement. It takes time. Black Lives Matter didn't just start when George Floyd got killed and when Ahmaud Arbery got shot and when Breonna Taylor got shot. Black Lives Matter has been going for some years, and they've had their issues and their hiccups, but it's been, you don't stop. Organizing is an ongoing process. Hopefully you never stop, because as long as you keep organizing, you keep building power. So take it from the experts who've been doing it for a long time, get your feet wet, learn from the mistakes, make continuous assessments, have organizing conversations every single day. And that's how you organize rank and file people. And if it's issues based, I mean, it'll kind of build on its own.
Awesome. I'm gonna attempt to combine some questions in the chat, and then, or Ivan, did you want to go?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep organizing, but I think I want to raise a point that that a phenomenon that I observed in Hong Kong, the newly formed union. Most of the unions are actually middle class. They're mainly for middle class, like accountants, like the financial analysts, like as nurses or some allied health professionals. In Hong Kong, the people that are from very grassroots, like cleaning workers, like security guards, like they're very unlikely to be very political. Like even though we have some, before that, I was in a student union helping the security guards to have better, like they have counting on they have better working places and more rest times like that. But after those kind of struggles, they do not realize that there is a system like capitalism that are oppressing them. They only care about their working condition or only care about their own wages, like that. But it's very hard to empower those kind of people. And in Hong Kong, the newly formed union are mainly based on the middle class people. I think there's an energy and more, they have more power to empower others and more knowledge to access to the knowledge or access to those kind of, for example, they do know how to check on the labor notes, but the security guards may not know how to check on something in the internet, actually. And so actually in this kind of phenomena, I think in Hong Kong, now we may need to do more work on organizing the middle class so that we can then empower the grassroots to have more, like to organize more struggles, like against the capitalism. So yeah, that is one of my observation during the past a half year. Yeah.
Thanks, Ivan. We are quickly running up against time. 90 minutes goes by really quick, and I just want to give the other speakers a chance to just wrap up and just to kind of summarize some of the questions and discussion in the chat. I think people really are arriving at what it'll take, as you wrap up your thoughts, what it'll take to truly build a global public health infrastructure that works for the people, that's anti-capitalist, that's bottom up, that incorporates migrant workers from Hong Kong, which has lots of parallels to undocumented workers here in the US. And just, yeah, how do we begin to get at a public health system that works for us as regular people? especially want to turn it over to Dennis or Winnie just to wrap up here.
I'm happy to go first. I'll keep it short and to the point. I mean, I think we need solidarity. We need solidarity within the United States across workers to fight for a better health system. I mean, this country spends more on healthcare per capita than any other country in the world, and we have some of the worst outcomes. Life expectancy actually in this country has been going down. People are dying younger in this country than previously, and a lot of that has to do with actually white people who are dying from opiate overdose, from alcohol, and suicide. That's one of the things that's actually driving down the thing. So that's the point that I think someone raised earlier, which is very important. Like, racism actually doesn't benefit white people. When we're divided, white people start dying because of horrible diseases as well. Not to say that there aren't disproportionate and health inequities, because the fact is still is that we have a racist system, and that's who's definitely being affected. We have to destroy racism if we're going to overcome what divides us, to fight for a better health system that's not based on making money, but it's based on meeting people's needs. We also need solidarity internationally. We as workers from across borders need to come together, no matter if we're from Mexico, from Brazil, from Hong Kong, from China, from the United States. We need to come across borders and come together in national solidarity. And unfortunately, some unions have not been so good at that. I mean, the United Steelworkers in America were the president was making ridiculous comments about dumping Chinese steel, and I stand with Trump for tariffs. I mean, that's just garbage. Even CWA was making comments about people who do phone work from the Philippines, saying we have to keep bringing these jobs and they have to be American. It's just trash. These are garbage ideas. We have to reject them in our unions. We have to reject them in our workplaces, and have the discussions to say we need solidarity in this country. We need solidarity internationally.
Thanks again for the time to give an opportunity for us to share the experience in Hong Kong and grab the experience in the US. I think the solidarity between us is very powerful, and we learned about how to tackle with the global pandemic in such a critical condition right now, because we know that the second wave has begun in the US, and I hope that you could stay strong and stay healthy. And for the union experience, I learned about we have to keep organizing and keep building the power, as Jennifer has said to us. So it's time to say thank you to all of you and allow us to have the opportunity to share in this platform. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, we have reached the end of our time tonight. Sorry if I didn't get to your question. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to first of all, our incredible interpreters working behind the scenes who helped us to connect with our international siblings in Hong Kong. Seriously, amazing work. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you so much to our speakers who are absolutely badass working class heroes. Winnie, thank you for explaining the particulars of the historic medical workers strike. Ivan for helping us examine the politics behind it. Dennis for just holding it down in Chi-Town and for front loading anti-racism in your work. Jennifer for your tireless work with high-risk, vulnerable communities in the Bay. And to all of you who attended tonight, thank you for coming and engaging with us. There are some familiar faces as well as some new ones. We'd like to invite you all to keep building with us as we confront the many challenges that face the global multiracial working class. Some of them are old and some of them are new. There are eminent security laws in Hong Kong. There's the continued surge of new COVID cases in the US. There's the emergence of a beautiful new people's movement against anti-Black racism here and all over. And we find ourselves on the edge of a global economic recession. And between all these different conditions, nobody has all the answers, but we guarantee that each of you has something indispensable to offer us in this community and the world. And so we hope that by highlighting workplace struggles, of frontline workers across borders and time zones, that this talk can offer some inspiration for how we can continue forward together to larger political goals. And so we welcome you to stay in touch with us. Follow the speakers on social media. We'll make sure to blast that out. Hit us up on Twitter and keep thinking with us so we can all continue learning from each other. And until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the struggle. Solidarity.